Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cybility Savvy, demystifying cybersecurity. Today, we have completely turned everything on its head, and rather than Michala being host, I'm hosting, and Michala is guest. So my name's Penny Wilson, and I'm CEO of a charity called Getting On Board. We work on trustee issues with a particular interest in trustee diversity. I'm here to quiz Michala to find out about what trustees ought to know about cybersecurity. And my starting point is I know absolutely nothing. So I hope that I'm quite typical as a trustee, and that's something that we'd obviously like to change.
Cybility Savvy, the quickest way to go from cyber confused to cyber savvy.
So let's kick off, Michala. Tell us what cybersecurity actually is.
Okay, so this is quite a funny question actually, because you'll get a different answer depending on who you speak to. If you were to just sort of look at what you see in the media, the term cybersecurity seems to relate to any sort of IT connected attack. When you actually sort of delve into things, there is actually a slight difference between information security and cybersecurity. Information security is really what we care about, because it's the information that's valuable, whether it's people's data, whether it's intellectual property, could be healthcare records, depending on what your charity is. And it's the information that's valuable. And not all systems are IT systems. How many charities out there actually still work on, pen and paper, good filing cabinet? If there was an incident with that would be an information security incident. So thinking about, physical protections and everything, all of that is information security. Now, with the whole world of connected systems in this world of the internet, cybersecurity is focused on protecting anything that is internet sort of connected, those interconnected networks. And that's really the sort of dividing line between the two. So any of your trustees who understand that difference are probably 80% better than a lot of us professionals out there who mix the terms.
Well, that's already really, really interesting. And in terms of those kinds of information that are held on internet-based things, and I haven't got any of the technology, so I apologise for that in advance. I'm probably quite typical there as well. What kind of information do charities hold that might be affected by this?
So in terms of the IT systems, quite often, especially for smaller charities who don't have their own IT teams to sort of build and maintain systems for them, typically we'll be using cloud-based services that are provided by people like, Microsoft, Google, all the big companies in the world. And so our information is going to be in those sorts of systems. And as trustees, one of the most common things that you'll be using is some sort of probably board papers application. It might just be that people are putting it on a Google Drive, for example, or if you're a large charity, you'll probably have a specialised app that you put the minutes and things out to. So the information that you're getting just from a governance point of view is potentially going to be quite sensitive depending on which committees you're on, stuff like that. In terms of the people who are doing the operational work, and again, smaller charities, it's typically one person doing both sides of it, then you're probably looking at things like the information you hold about your volunteers. So it's probably going to be names, addresses, contact details. Again, depending on what sort of charity you are, you might hold some more sensitive information about them as well, around, say, occupational health data, for example. If you're a large charity, you're going to have more staff, so you'll have obviously their details. And then, obviously, what we're all here for is our beneficiaries. So the systems that hold their data. And again, that could be anything from an old-fashioned Rolodex to an IT system, say Outlook or whatever it is, and having all their details in there. Or again, bigger charities will have a customer relationship management solution, or perhaps a patient management system. Very much depends on what you do, but fundamentally we're all here for beneficiaries and want to look after and protect that data.
And I guess our stakeholders might include donors and supporters and ambassadors. And yeah,
absolutely. And actually, just on that point, when we then think about the fundraising aspect of it and those people, quite often charities, we have some high profile people who are going to support and spread our message, and their contact information is particularly sensitive. Thinking about some of the big donors, again, those could be more sensitive lists that need perhaps additional protections compared to other information. So there's lots of things around it when you start digging into it.
That's great. I feel like we're like have already got a much better grasp of this. So I'd really love you to spell out to us, why should trustees care about cybersecurity?
Fundamentally, as a trustee, the role is about governance of the charity that you're looking over, and hoping that they make the right sort of decisions and do things in an ethical way. Cybersecurity, and when I say cybersecurity from now on, okay, I'm using it interchangeably as the media does, in terms of it meaning both information and cybersecurity, just because it's easier than saying both all the time. If you think again that information is throughout all of the processes that your charity does, as well as the people operating it and the beneficiaries, it's all about risk. Day in, day out on those committees, you're making decisions about risk, and what is going to be good for the charity, and where do you put your finite resources. So it's always about the benefit versus the risk, and you are probably used to dealing with, say, health and safety risk. It's no different. That's one of the things that I have to admit, it's a bit of a pet peeve, that people sort of dress cybersecurity risk up as if it's something really special. And actually, it's just another type of risk. Yes, when you go into the detail, you might need somebody like myself to talk about the expertise around that and help you understand it, in the same way that you'd probably use a health and safety advisor to help you understand the details of caution, etc. So it's no different. That's the first thing I want to say. Every trustee understands risk, because that's what you're doing, and this is what that's about. Ultimately, you're on the hook as a trustee potentially for your charity. The key differences between the private sector and charities is that, and I'm not saying there aren't private sector who do this, because there are, but we all are here because we want to do a good job and help society. There's an assumption that everyone in the sector wants to do that, and therefore there's a high level of trust. And as trustees, you might want to challenge that assumption, because charity fraud is a huge thing as well. And that's the sort of thing that you want to be aware of, so that you can sort of maximise those limited fundraised funds and make sure they're being used in the appropriate way. So it's really just all about the governance of the charity and feeding into that.
And do you think, following on from that, that because of that assumption of trust, that charities are low-hanging fruit when it comes to cybersecurity issues?
Yes and no. Low-hanging fruit just because of being on the internet. I would say everyone, regardless of charity or not, if you're connected to the internet, you're low-hanging fruit by default. And then the more protections you put in place, you kind of make yourself harder to target. And so even if you just do some of the basic things, we always say that the sort of 5 basic things around the Cyber Essentials scheme, if a charity can do those, then that's generally going to protect from about 80% of the attacks out there. And so you'll be slightly higher up that tree. But in terms of the trust and that assumption of trust with people, I think where it does increase the risk for charities is that there's something we call insider threat. That's when you have somebody who comes into an organisation, or they might have worked in the organisation for years and have a change of personal circumstances. Like right now, for example, we've just had COVID, so charities are already struggling with fundraising. We've now got the cost of living crisis and the energy crisis, and that's putting additional pressure on. It's worth considering, and I know it's a horrible thought. None of us want to think this about the people we work with. But again, as trustees, I think you have a duty to consider the increased risk to your organisation, because if I'm working there and suddenly, I don't know, my rent's gone up, I'm really struggling because I've not had a pay rise in 10 years, then if I'm approached and said, I'll give you £1,000 for your login, is that really doing any harm? For some people, they might think not. And it's easy money. So that's the sort of thing that trustees should be aware of. And then asking, the exec team or your other hat, if you are the one person doing both things, is that the sort of thing that you are at risk of? What are you doing to protect against that? So,
it's really interesting. And it's interesting earlier that you drew a parallel with other sorts of risk. This conversation is making me think about safeguarding risk and some of the things that you do to reduce safeguarding risk are not only to reduce the chance of it happening, but also to reduce the chance of people putting themselves in a situation where they might be accused of something that they have or actually haven't done.
Exactly.
So not all the systems where actually there's not going to be any accusations. That somebody couldn't have done this thing, but you might have think that if you're looking at how did this thing happen, if for sure it couldn't have come from your staff, then that's an enormous reassurance and it's taken a risk away, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't say necessarily taking it away completely, but definitely reduced it. And if there is an incident, you're in a better position then to sort of defend your case with the regulators.
You mentioned 5 basics that organisations need to have in place. Can you run us through what those 5 basics are, please?
Yeah. So some years ago, the government introduced the Cyber Essentials scheme, and the idea being you've got these sort of 5 basic areas that we call sort of cyber hygiene. And the first one that's most important is access control. So knowing who works for your charity, the identity of everybody. And that can be really challenging actually when you've got a lot of volunteers, or perhaps, partner with universities. So maybe you've got students and things as well. But there's all sorts of the more you dig into this, there's actually quite a lot of things to work out. So, and again, obviously, it's easier for smaller charities, so you're in an advantage if you're smaller in this case than the larger charities where it's really quite a big headache. So that's the first thing. Who do you have, working on your behalf? Where are they working? Are they using your own kit, or are they actually using their own personal kit? Because that's going to introduce different risks as well. What systems do they need access to? In a smaller charity, it's very easy to default to just giving everybody everything, whereas we would generally say you need to operate on a principle of, we call it least privilege. So you only have access to what you need to at the time that you need to. And if you sort of follow that rule, generally don't go far wrong. And one of the things that people would want to do from a trustee point of view here is, again, if you're smaller or medium size and you outsource your IT, is looking at their processes. What do they have in place to protect you and your data? So that's a really key area about access control. It also looks at, so not just the identity part and the authorization parts we've talked about in terms of who can have access, and who's allowed to, but also the authentication part. And when I say authentication, that's about proving to a system that you are who you say you are. I really can't overstate the importance of enabling multi-factor authentication. In authentication, we talk about there's something you have, which could be, say, a phone with a mobile app on it. There's something which is your password, typically, or a PIN code. And then something you are. And with these modern, like say, smartphones, for example, we're using our biometric data. So it might be my face that authenticates me, might be my fingerprint or my voice print. The more combinations of those you use, the extra hurdles you're putting in front of an attacker or somebody who might be trying to get that data. You've probably all seen the news recently about the Uber breach. One of the things that perhaps stands out about this attack is that they used a technique called MFA fatigue. And what that means is, when if you have an app and instead of it generating a code, it just pops up and says, somebody's trying to log into your account. Was this you? And you say approve or not. And what they do, the attacker this is, they just keep sending you this thing over and over and over. And after 60 odd of these things, most people are just going to go, oh, shut up, and and approve it. And that is when the attacker can then, having gotten into your system, they can then add their own device for multi-factor authentication. And after that, they don't need to bother you anymore. You won't know. But the other thing we then think about is the sort of secure configuration of the devices that we use. So if it's a large charity, you probably have IT that are locking things down and making it secure to protect that information. If you're a small charity, then you don't have that luxury. So then it's a case of thinking about, okay, who can actually physically access my device? Do I have one account that does everything on the device? Or do I actually split it and have one administration account that I only ever use when I need to install something or update something? And then I do all of the charity work generally on a normal account. That I would recommend, by the way, because if, again, you're doing your normal charity work and say a phishing email comes in, so that's where somebody's trying to deliberately get your username and password, for example, if you accidentally click on that and it installs or tries to install some malware, because you have split out the administration from your normal, that will stop quite a lot of it, not all of it, but quite a lot of it. So it's really worth doing that. As part of this, as you go on from sort of thinking about the actual configuration and security of the device, you then go into things like keeping it up to date. We often use the term patching, whether it's your mobile phone, whether it's, say, an Xbox that your kids have, or adults for that matter. Whatever it is, it might be.
No judgment here.
No, I'm a gamer, so we've got lots of devices here. But when you get that prompt about updating the software, do it. Don't operate on the kind of old-fashioned idea of it ain't broke, so I won't touch it. It is just not worth the risk. Just do the update. Larger organizations will have processes in place to test updates before they sort of roll them out to the organization. And again, as trustees, that's one of the things that you can challenge and check, how are you actually getting these updates out? What percentage of devices are up to date? How long is it taking you to get everything up to date? So make sure you're doing that on personal devices and work devices. It used to be the analogy of your information was in your castle, like the crown jewels, and you'd have all the sort of doors and locks and the guards and all that protection, around the castle with your moat, etc. That's no longer true, because we're taking our information and storing it in the cloud. And again, post-COVID, a lot of people are working from home. So we no longer can rely on it's in this secure area at work, it's all good. And so thinking about how do you protect those sort of connections between wherever you are and where your data is to get to it, how are you doing that? Is it secure? And one of the key things you can do, again, especially smaller charities, but applies to large ones as well, is use a VPN, which stands for Virtual Private Network. And if you'd like to know a bit more about how that works, again, we've got a separate episode on that. So you're probably all used to having some sort of antivirus software on your PCs, and you can also get it on your mobile phones. So if you haven't got it on a mobile device, it is worth doing that as well. That's really important, again, protecting your mobile devices, because so many of us now access information through that mobile device.
Great, thank you. This has been really, really interesting. I feel that I know a lot more about what cybersecurity is, that I understand the kind of bits of information that it pertains to. And you've talked through some of the controls, and I know that people can delve into other episodes to learn more about those. Let's talk about where trustees might start. So if somebody, and let's start with smaller organizations where trustees might be the only operational people, or they might only have one or two part-time members of staff. If they're thinking, I've never thought about this issue before, what should they do first? Where would they start in a small organization?
Okay, so there is a really helpful resource on the National Cybersecurity Centre website, which we can add to the show notes for you, that takes you through a little check to sort of get, just ask you a series of questions about what you're doing, and then it tells you in response to those answers some of the things that you can do and focus on right now. So if you're completely starting from scratch, that's probably where I would start. There's also the small charities guide that they produce, and that again provides some information on a bit more about some of these basic sort of hygiene things that you can do and put in place. What it doesn't really talk about, though, that I think is quite important from a sort of information governance perspective, again, is understanding just what you have. So know what information you've got and where it is, who's working for you, what devices people are using to access the systems, what are your physical locations, do you have filing cabinet storage that you need to think about, what suppliers are you working with, or are you providing services to other businesses who then provide services on to our beneficiaries. So think about that whole supply chain, but right at the start, just start with that nice simple checklist and then build from there. It's an iterative process. We always say that cybersecurity is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So just get to the starting line, and just as you train for a marathon, start small and you build up.
That sounds like a really good manageable starting point and some signposting to helpful resources. And if you're a trustee of a much larger organisation, an organisation that's probably got an IT department, if you joined a board and you were wondering, I wonder what this organisation is doing about cybersecurity, where would you start there? What kind of questions should trustees there be asking?
I would probably be having a conversation and want to have a bit of a tour, whether it's a CIO that's in place, Chief Information Officer, or whether perhaps they've just got a head of IT. Again, different organisations have different models, but whoever's responsible for that IT, get a sense, just have them talk through what the setup is in that organisation and how they handle things, so you get an understanding of it. And once you understand where they're at, then you can start sort of probing into those things a little bit more. So are they using, for example, standardized good practices? There's something called ITIL, the IT Infrastructure Library, but there's other versions too about the wider point around IT service management and how you deliver IT services. So asking the question around, well, what processes do you follow for IT service management? What have you actually implemented? And as a starting point, the thing you would expect to hear back is that they would at least have request fulfillment, incident management. They may have problem management, especially the bigger charities, you absolutely want problem management, and change and configuration management. From a cybersecurity perspective, it's the change in configuration management that's really crucial. So when I use the phrase configuration management, what that means is, I said about all the assets, where they are, who's using them, that all comes under configuration management. It's about how the relationships between them. And when you understand that, if there's then a change to one of those, you understand the impact that goes on through that. So as a trustee, being aware that your IT does have a change in configuration management process will straight away mean that you're a bit that notch higher again in terms of cybersecurity, because at least they have visibility of what they've got and they're managing it. If you just hear that they're maybe doing incident management and nothing else, then you might want to sort of think about, well, actually, how are you managing, all the stuff then?
For many, I'm already feeling frightened now by what you're saying, because I'm thinking,
oh no,
I wouldn't know how to ask these questions. I'm going to forget the terms. But presumably for larger charities, there must be consultants who'll come in and do reviews as well, so you can get an external
audit reports
audit on this. I was thinking about two things as well, Michala. I was thinking about the risk register, and I'd love you to say something about that in a minute, because I know that's one of your bugbears as well. But also this diplomacy, and this isn't just a cybersecurity issue, but a trustee coming in talking direct to senior staff. I think we need to be careful, don't we, that that is seen positively, that the CEO or equivalent is happy with that, that the staff see this as something really positive, that probably a trustee has never come to talk to a chief information officer or a head of IT. And actually, how do we position that so that they think, brilliant, you know, I've been banging on for years about how important my area is, and finally a trustee is asking me about it. So that trying to couch it all very diplomatically is going to get us to where we need to be, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it really does come down to the culture of the organisation, because you're absolutely right. There are some organisations where, you know, it's like the trustees are up here, you know, the staff who are in the front line are down here, and the executive are like, never twain shall meet. You know, that doesn't really sort of contribute very well to transparency and sort of that, you know, trust. And from a governance point of view, I might just see that as a bit of a red flag myself. Then you've got organisations who support the trustees in doing and fulfilling their role of governance. But when you onboard a trustee in the first place, it's really good if you have a solid induction for them. And, you know, it could be that at that point, they get to meet some of these key people, and they can then ask those questions and get a sense of, what is this I'm now responsible for? That's
an immediate action we could all take, isn't it? Which is, you know, how much of this stuff is in our inductions, not the staff, for trustees. And I'd imagine actually in larger organisations for staff, a lot of this is probably standard, but not necessarily. But I don't think it's standard for trustee inductions. I think it's probably wholly missing for most trustee inductions. So an action there for us to think, right, yeah, let's sort that one out.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely.
And what about risk registers? What are your thoughts on how this should be appearing on risk registers?
It will vary depending on the size of the organisation. If we start with a small one, first of all, you might have a sort of quite basic risk register where you've just got maybe sort of 10 or so things on it, in which case you might just want to have sort of one thing that covers everything around information and cybersecurity. We talk about in our field the CIA, the confidentiality of information, so that you only have access to it if you need to. We talk about the integrity of information, and by that we mean that only people who should be able to change it can do. Integrity and accuracy of information can be really crucial. Finance, for example, one digit here or not can make a difference. In IT, it's really important that we use the correct numbers to identify different machines. Putting one full stop or something in the wrong place, one digit out of place, a huge impact potentially. So integrity is really important. And I know that generally speaking, when we talk about trustees and integrity, we'll be thinking more about the sort of ethics side of it, as you say, the value. But this is more about the integrity of the information. And then we'll talk about A for availability. So is the information accessible and available to the people that need it and authorised to access it at the time that they need it? Those three things, the CIA, are what you can throw in to that risk on the risk register. An example might be there's a risk that information that we hold could have a compromise of confidentiality, integrity, availability, which could result in, it could be potentially fines from a regulator, it could be reputational damage. And that's obviously the key thing that us charities really care about, the reputational damage, because that will then potentially impact on the income from people. You know, thinking about that, you know, there's a risk that this could happen and this is the impact to us if it does. So you can roll it all up into that one thing if you're, say, a smaller charity. In terms of larger ones, what you'll want to do is start breaking that out and thinking about the different types of scenarios that could give rise to that thing happening. Some might be your overarching risk, for example, but think about different scenarios. And I mentioned earlier about phishing could be one. Ransomware has been big in the news, where, you know, people, these malicious actors, throw malware onto your machines and lock it up so you can't use it unless you pay a ransom. And nowadays, actually, just to let you be aware of this, increasingly what they're doing is they're doing what we call a double extortion. When you think you're happily working away and nothing's wrong, in the background, they're stealing data. Once they've got that data, that's when they then lock your machine down and say, pay us the ransom. Otherwise, we will publish this data. Whichever size they are, they need to be living. They're not just something you put together, shove on a shelf and don't look at it for another year. Information cybersecurity is that it's changing all the time. So keep that risk under regular review and focus on your objectives as a charity. So, I mentioned about the scenarios. There's a wonderful way of approaching this, which is about objective-centered risk management. And I've got a separate episode with a lady called Sabrina Segal that we go into a bit more depth on this. But when there's so many sort of scenarios out there, just focus on the things that are going to directly prevent you from achieving your objectives as a charity. So start with your objectives and think about what could stop us from achieving that.
Thank you. And I've had a women's refuge, not a particular women's refuge, but thinking about a women's refuge as I'm speaking about the risk register and thinking, actually, there's some really drastic potential impact there of people's of residents' data being out there and getting into the wrong hands. What are the most common breaches? And if you've got not necessarily named examples, but anonymous examples, or your sense of what is happening most frequently in terms of problems.
One of the resources that you could take a look at is the Information Commissioner's Office publish a quarterly review that analyses and looks at, what are people actually reporting to them. Typically, most of it is actually around that paper-based information. Maybe somebody leaves something on a bus. And then also one of the biggest ones is about unintended disclosures via email, because somebody's put in the wrong address, or perhaps somebody's forwarded a chain on. This is one of the most common things. There'll be something really sensitive right down the chain. And because nobody's actually deleted that trail before forwarding it on, that sensitive information can end up in places that you never expected it to be.
You can set that in your email settings, can't you? You can have that set so that it doesn't forward on what's gone before.
You can in some of them, yes, not all of them, I don't think, but yeah.
What strikes me about those examples is they're all very human, aren't they? It's a mistake. People have made a mistake.
Yeah, and actually the latest Verizon data breach investigation report found that, I think off the top of my head, it was 84 or 86% of data breaches all came about due to some sort of human error, some sort of human factor. Particularly big organisations will happily spend lots of money on technical whiz-bang solutions that claim to secure your organisation, when actually, if they spent a fraction of that in helping support their staff, not just through sort of education and awareness systems, and I don't mean just doing e-learning once a year, but the processes. One of the most important things that gets overlooked, I think, is core process design, because you can engineer out a lot of risk if you look at your business processes. Do you understand your business processes? Do you know where that data is going? And if you are just by yourself, it's relatively easy for you to sort of figure that out. If you've got multiple teams and the data's going between things, it's a really great way to sort of pull people together as a workshop and have them map it out and talk about where those risks might be.
One example of that being you're taking personal data in via some sort of registration form, and that is sitting in a nice secure bit of software which is all locked down. People have their logins, and you've thought about who has and hasn't got a login, but it's also coming via email, and then people are forwarding it all over the shop. And actually, that's an unnecessary part of the process that you could probably just completely remove by telling people to log back in when they need to see the original data.
Yeah, the other thing that is a bit of a loophole to watch out for with this is quite often some of these systems, particularly when you can't afford the kind of whiz-bang ones that have all the extra controls in, but they make you pay for it, which is, again, a pet peeve. people shouldn't have to pay extra for security, in my view. It should be part of the core offering. Anyway, if you let's say I've logged into that system, I run a report, but for me, the reporting capability in a system is absolutely useless. It's not giving me what I want. So instead, I click on this extra useful button about exporting it to Excel. So I take all this data out to Excel, I do what I like with it, I save it in a particular drive, which maybe then gets synced to somewhere else. And all of a sudden, you don't know where your data is, and all before you know it, there's a data breach. So that's something to watch out for as well. Does the systems you use actually address the needs of the people who are doing the process?
And I guess in a way, we're here to talk about trustees. And actually, I'm nodding along at this as a CEO of a small charity.
Yeah.
And I guess the CEO of a very large charity wouldn't be mapping the processes within their organization, but actually a trustee of a large organization doing that, but a trustee of a very tiny charity, particularly a charity with no staff, which after all is most charities, they would be doing all this. And actually, if you're a volunteer trustee, you've got other stuff going on in your life, whether that's a day job, caring responsibilities, a course, other volunteering. You're always trying to use your time.
Yeah,
you're always scant on time, aren't you? So actually, you're just getting stuff done, and you probably got your brain focused on what are the frontline things we're trying to deliver here. And probably I think many people probably haven't thought about these processes and where people's data are going. So it's very helpful for trustees of smaller charities.
Yeah, and that comes back to what I said about, what are the objectives of the charity? What are you there to try and achieve? And therefore, which business processes help you achieve that? And then start there. Look at the risks around those particular processes.
Yeah, thank you. I want to ask you quite briefly about this one, which is about insurance.
Yeah.
And I find this with trustee responsibilities that people think, oh, we've got insurance, so therefore, job's done. And my suspicion is you're probably going to say the same about insurance for cybersecurity. But tell us, is it part of a standard policy? If it isn't, what should trustees be aware of if they're thinking about insurance, and how much protection is insurance really going to provide?
And you'll be pleased to know we have a separate episode that goes into this in more depth. The insurance industry has definitely been sort of changing a lot as obviously this threat's been increasing over the years. Some of them will have some sort of basic protection around cybersecurity built into their core policies now. We're seeing that a little bit more. But mostly there's separate cybersecurity policies. Depending on, again, the size of your organization, there will be different things that insurance company is looking for from you to commit to in order to be willing to provide you with a level of cover. And one of those things is, as I mentioned earlier, cyber essentials. So as an organization, if you certified cyber essentials, then you are likely to get a slightly cheaper premium, for example. And then if there is a claim, you're more likely to have it paid. No guarantee, this is the thing, because if a breach happens, but you've not been doing the basics and they think, you were negligent in that, then they're probably not going to pay out.
And I think I heard in one of your other episodes from the policeman about it, it's like leaving your doors open.
Yeah.
Like, what's the point in having home insurance if actually your door's wide open? They're not going to pay it to you and your stuff's gone.
Exactly that. Yeah.
And I guess some of the other risks you were talking about earlier, harm to beneficiaries, safeguarding issues, reputational risk, all of that, that an insurance payout doesn't cover any of that. That it doesn't take away the damage that's been done. Really interesting. Thank you.
Can I just say one thing for small charities? Sorry, with the Cyber Essentials scheme, that if you do certify through the IASME, comes with, I think it's about £65,000 of cybersecurity insurance cover. So that's worth just being aware of.
Okay, that's good to know. I wanted to ask you, on the one hand, it's very easy with this topic, isn't it, to talk about all the risks and the bad stuff and the stuff that could go wrong. But what really motivating thing would you say to trustees to encourage them to educate themselves about cybersecurity, to take action here? What is the positive slant on this?
I think the positive thing is, and again, it's going to be different depending on what sort of charity you work for as to how you might sort of spin that. But it's about fundamentally, we, again, coming back to charities and what we're about, it's about caring. We want to make a difference, and security of your beneficiaries' data is one way you show you care. If you are a sort of charity who is maybe providing services into others and you have contracts, then good security will help you win more business.
You very helpfully signposted lots of resources as we've gone. You're going to put some stuff in the show notes, but what are the main good places to go to?
You've got wealth of resources on the internet. How do you know which are the good ones? So what we've done is we've actually created something we call the Ring of Resources for Charities, cybersecurity resources. And it takes you through the kind of process of identifying, what you've got, and then these are the resources you should go and look at. Then, what protections to put in place. These are the resources to look at, right through to detecting an incident and how you respond to it. Do absolutely have a look at that if you haven't already, I would say to people. The key places other than that are the National Cybersecurity Centre, and they have a charity engagement team who are keen to support the sector. There's across the country, there are cyber resilience centres, which are police-led, but they're sort of partnering with private sector and other organisations across the country. And they provide some of these services around, looking at your policies, looking at your security controls technically, perhaps doing a vulnerability scan of your website. And they do that at really rock bottom prices, because the police have recognised that the crime they used to see on the streets is now online. And so they need themselves to sort of get with the times and help protect people in that way. Obviously, you've got, there's a section about this on the Charity Commission's site, the fundraising regulator site, the Direct Marketing Associations. So there are lots of things out there. So depending on which thing you think is going to impact your objectives and your achievement of those, I would maybe give you different resources for those. So, if people have a question, please just, reach out to us at Cybility Savvy. I'm more than happy to sign those people, hop on a call for a few minutes and, point them in the right direction.
That's a fantastic offer. So we're at the end, and I want to ask you, is there anything that you wish I had asked you?
Probably something around how do we know what to do if there is actually a cybersecurity incident in our charity. So the answer to that, again, it will vary depending on your size, but fundamentally it will be a process around identifying what you think has happened, analysing that, containing it, particularly if it's malicious software, so that it can't spread any further. Or if it's, say, somebody accidentally published something onto the website in response to an FOI request, for example, pulling that data down. So whatever it is, containing it and limiting the scope of the damage. And then in terms of, sort of how you sort of respond and recover, that's going to look very different depending on the size of your organisation. Some you might deal with in the scope of a day. Others, it could be weeks and months of recovery, like, for example, the one that's affected the NHS recently. But what you can all do is come up with a plan now before it happens.
So what's the process?
What's the process?
Yeah.
Who do you need to contact? Who do you need to bring on board to help you with this process if you don't have people in-house? And there's a great sample plan from the Cyber Resilience Centres, actually. So that's a really good one, particularly for small charities. And then the larger ones, I'd say, have a look at the incident response guidance on the National Cybersecurity website, and also the CREST website have some great stuff around incident response and buying support services for that. Some insurance companies will provide it, by the way. If there's an incident, you can claim, ask them for support.
Okay, that's a good tip. Thank you. Yes, that would have been an excellent question. But I'm glad I asked you the question what you would have wanted me to ask so that we could end. So that brings us to an end. Michala, I hope you've enjoyed being guest rather than see whether that means you don't ask such evil questions. So thank you all for joining us on Cybility Savvy.
Yeah, and thank you, Penny, for hosting and putting me through my paces today. It has definitely been a fun and very different experience. So thanks. Maybe we can do it again sometime.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you next time.